After 4 failed attempts, the UN Security Council has adopted a resolution calling for urgent pauses in the fighting in Gaza and for humanitarian corridors in order to allow aid in. Nearly 6 weeks into Israel's bombing of the Strip, diplomats were able to find common ground by focusing on the plight of Palestinian children. But both Israel and the Palestinians have criticized the resolution. The Palestinian envoy said there should not just have been a pause, but a ceasefire long ago, while Israel's ambassador condemned the resolution as meaningless.
The Security Council should have called for a ceasefire a long time ago. It should have called for a ceasefire now. It should have heeded the call by the UN and every humanitarian organization on earth calling for a humanitarian ceasefire, including the Secretary General of the United Nations. It should have been convinced that there is no military solution, especially one that relies on the commission of atrocities, and it should have advanced political ones.
This Council has just adopted a resolution that is regretfully detached from the reality on the ground. Israel commends the Council for calling for the immediate and unconditional release of the 239 hostages. Yet sadly, this resolution falls on deaf ears when it comes to Hamas and other terrorist organizations. On the 7th of October, savage Hamas terrorists launched a barbaric invasion into Israel, murdering, raping, and brutalizing innocent civilians. Nearly 6 weeks have passed. This Council has convened on the matter almost 10 times and still has not succeeded in condemning Hamas's October 7th massacre.
That also means that as Israel exercises its right and indeed its responsibility to protect its people from acts of terror, it must do so in a way that is consistent with the laws of war. And I want to be clear, the United States does not want to see firefights in any hospitals when innocent people, helpless people, sick people are trying to get medical care they so desperately need. Patients and the people who care for them must be protected.
Well, for more on the conflict, let's bring in Arise Middle East analyst Dr. Saul Zadka, who's monitoring developments from London. Good to see you, Dr. Zadka. Let's start with that UN Security Council resolution that's now been adopted after 4 failed attempts. The Americans lending their voice there to calls for humanitarian pause and for humanitarian corridors. Is it meaningless, or is it going to resonate with Israel?
It is obviously directed at the efforts that are being made to release the hostages, because opening or creating humanitarian corridor would definitely help to release the hostages or maybe accelerate the negotiation between all the protagonists, the Americans, the Israelis, the Qataris, and Hamas, of course. Hamas, in my opinion, is stalling the process because of the Israelis' activities around Shifa Hospital, and that's why we did not hear about any development about how and how many hostages are going to be released. President Biden has a direct interest in releasing the hostages, not least because there are about 20 American hostages. One of them is a toddler whose parents were murdered in front of his eyes. There is also one Israeli woman who was abducted when she was heavily pregnant, and she apparently gave birth in captivity. So all the efforts in the region are directed into releasing the hostages. Hence, the need to achieve a resolution in the Security Council that would enable such an exchange to take place.
So it's not because anybody cares about the more than 11,000 innocent Palestinians who've been killed or the children who are being slaughtered every day?
Apparently, there is a sense that the Israelis would have a free hand, not only by the United States, also by the European Union, in order to accomplish its military goal in Gaza. And that means no ceasefire, no permanent ceasefire. Hence, the talk about creating other humanitarian corridor or humanitarian pauses in order to bring about some kind of quiet in the region, also, although for temporarily. So we are talking about a series of measures that may eventually lead to a complete ceasefire, but not in the foreseeable future. The Israelis know that they have limited time. They are acting on borrowed time. President Biden is very much afraid that a relationship between the Americans, the Arab world, keeps deteriorating, and he wants to avoid that. In my opinion, within the next 1 or 2 weeks, we will see the international community imposing a complete ceasefire on the IDF.
And from what you're hearing, is there now conclusive evidence to suggest that Hamas has a command center under the Al-Shifa hospital?
No, not yet. It could be that such a headquarters would never be found. They found equipment, they found Kalashnikovs, they found some military items, they found some evidence that suggested that Hamas was present at the hospital. They also discovered a direct link between the hospital and some of the Israeli hostages, including the soldier who had been released a couple of weeks ago, but they did not find any headquarters in the basement of Shifa Hospital.
So, I mean, what are some of the difficulties, Dr. Zadka, that Israeli troops will be facing as they try to dismantle Hamas, who are using tunnels as a form of defense? I mean, what will be the operational complexity of trying to eliminate such a massive subterranean structure and such an invisible, unpredictable threat?
The so-called metro system in Gaza Strip is the strength of Hamas. And Hamas is definitely benefiting from the fact that they have hostages. Hence, the fact that Hamas is not in a hurry to release all of them. The Israelis can claim that they managed to have a complete control of Gaza, at least in the north side of the Strip, overground. As we reported yesterday, now they are trying to evacuate the Palestinian population from 4 towns in the south. That means that they are going to the other side of the Strip in the next couple of days. However, most of the tunnels are still intact. Even if the Israelis killed thousands of Hamas members, they still have the task of neutralizing the tunnels. That means trying to overcome the booby traps that Hamas will set for the Israeli soldiers, which means really that the fighting in Gaza would not be over within the next few weeks. It may take maybe a year in order to flush out all the Hamas people from the tunnels in Gaza.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zadka. Dr. Saul Zadka is a RISE Middle East analyst. He was talking to me there from London.